You learned a lot by listening to farmers. You learned the value of a hard day's work and the necessity of planning ahead. You learned that even during harvest season, you still look forward. You buy good seed, nurture the land, and make smart decisions that pay off later. In short, you keep one eye on the present and one on the future. And today's guest subscribes to that same outlook. Despite the media gaslighting us that there's no recession, that wages are up, that Bidenomics are working, the Federal Reserve cut rates, not just 25, but 50 basis points. Now, you don't need a Harvard degree to know why, but maybe it helps because a month ago, our speaker predicted this exact outcome. How? He listened. He sat down with real Americans, despite, oh my gosh, so cute, despite the implausible media blitz. He saw heartland families in dire straits. He saw that the economy was rotten, and he knew privileged DC insiders desperate for power would prime the pump. It's not the first time. For years, our speakers stressed border security, a common sense message that resonates with patriots. He said, an open border is a no border. As he crisscrossed Iowa, learning from farmers, completing the full grass link, he advocated strengthening all national borders. And the talking heads went nuts. They laughed, they mocked, they jeered. OMG, should we fear Canada? But then they looked at the data and suddenly every major candidate grasped the menace of fentanyl, sex traffickers, and terrorists entering illegally from the north, and the jokes stopped. But his most famous example of prescient, the one DC Democrats truly despise, is that for years, he warned against focusing our resources on defeating Biden. You see, Vivek knew Biden was a puppet, a placeholder, a stalking horse the left would put out to pasture. And on Fox News, on podcasts, on The Stump, and on Twitter, one confident voice told the world that Harris, not Biden, was the real threat, a deadly threat, an existential threat, but one we may yet survive. Because amid his gloomy forecasts, today's speaker remained undaunted. He began each rally starting with a fundamental truth, that God is real. With God, all things are possible. As Frederick Douglass said, with God, one man holds a majority against the universe. My friends, that means if we stand with God, if we fight, we can win. Please welcome a man committed to making America not just great again, but the greatest it has ever been, Vivek Ramaswamy.
Thank you, and thank you for the warm welcome and allowing me to join you all this way. We are traveling, hitting the road constantly. I've been in a number of swing states over the course of the last little bit. And as you can see, I'm also on parent duty right now as well. But one of the things I'm most grateful for is actually having pursued the campaign as a family. And I think that that's something that I learned very early on. We initially thought my wife, she's a surgeon, is she going to she did end up keeping her job intact, but we're going to do a few days a week where I'm on the road, a few days a week at home. We tried it for the first month. It didn't work that way. We reoriented as a family and said, we're going to do this together as a family. And I think it brought us closer together. And it is a funny way, my older son, who you may see running around again, he was a COVID baby. And he's, I think one of the things that happened during the lockdowns is that he was born in 2020. Kids didn't have as much of the normal interaction that they would have. There was no better cure for that than meeting thousands of people over the course of the campaign over the last year. So from our family's perspective, we're incredibly grateful for that experience. But I will tell you, my concerns about the country that drew me into the presidential race are still acute concerns today, perhaps even more so. I think that we as conservatives, with the best of intentions, have consistently fallen into a trap, right? You mentioned one of them. The reason I was so vocal from the Republican debate stage last year that Biden wasn't going to be the nominee wasn't to pat myself on the back when that was correct. It was because I saw us falling into a trap as our side, earnest with our intentions as we often do. Ronna McDaniel, the chairwoman of the RNC, had made us sign a debate pledge before we made it on the stage that said it was called the Beat Biden Pledge. And I remember having a respectful disagreement with her to say that by focusing all of our ire on one target, likely a false target, we're going to waste a year and a half of financial capital, of political capital with voters, only to have that really be wasted resources in the end. This looks like it would actually be a great game plan if you were setting it up from the other side. That's exactly what happened. I can go through the series of traps we've fallen into, but I think the biggest trap of all is the one that I'm worried about in the next 40 days, which is that the left gives us a lot to criticize, right? Whether it's Biden, whether it's Harris, there's plenty we could do to pick them apart. But I think that becomes a bit of a trap because we forget to do the one thing that will actually not only win us this election, but revive our country, which is to answer who we are and what we actually stand for. And I think that that's a step we've, in the modern conservative movement, forgotten. And here's why. I mean, it's part of being a conservative is to conserve what actually got us to where we are. But the dilemma for us is what happens when the values you're trying to conserve cease to exist. We have to recreate them in our country. And that's what I meant all of last year. And I mean it today when I say that 2024 is a 1776-like moment. You know, believe it or not, I'm not making this up. I was just having lunch with my son before this. He was actually really interested. I was telling the story of the Revolutionary War, about the founding of the country with rapt attention. He was interested in this. He's read books about it. But I told him that because I do feel like we are in one of those rare moments in history where it's not just about protecting or conserving that which we care about. When that which we wish to conserve itself has, in many ways, at least parts of it, ceased to exist, it's up to us to actually create what's missing, which means we can't just criticize the other side that caused its disappearance. We have to offer our own alternative vision of who we are and what we actually stand for. And I'm not blaming any other person in the Republican Party or the conservative movement. Consider this a self-reflection, right? We've spent a lot of time criticizing. I have myself, wokeism, transgenderism, climatism, and COVIDism. That's attacking the left's vision of race, gender, sexuality, and climate, where I think we would be even better served to also go further than that and offer grounded in the individual, family, nation, and God. And that beats race, gender, sexuality, and climate if we have the courage to actually stand for something. And so I believe this was why we did not have that red wave in 2022 was not because of abortion, wasn't because of Trump. They like to blame symptoms. I think or even non-causes. I think the reality is the deeper void was we fell into the trap of criticizing the radical Biden agenda. First of all, Biden's not even the nominee, but second of all, criticizing the other side's insufficient if we don't actually have something that we're actually standing for. What are we running to? And I think that's what, especially my generation, by the way, I travel college campuses still, even after having left the campaign. I was at the University of Pittsburgh last week. Interesting state, obviously, Pennsylvania, every vote counts. So we're picking up a lot of new voter registrations there. I was in Wisconsin last week. We see a lot of young people on campuses, and even at the larger rallies that we hold, we have a lot of people from the next generation who haven't traditionally been Republican voters or conservatives. At least we don't think of them that way. But what I see in the country right now, I've seen it over the last year, I see it now more than ever, is that all of us, especially young people, but I think it's true of all of us, are hungry to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And yet right now, we can't even answer what it means to be an American. And I think that's the most important issue that we end up not discussing in this election cycle, is that deficit of national pride. Make no mistake, there are other important issues that I believe need to be, and very well pragmatically will be addressed if we end up with the right result in November. Seal the southern border, mass deportations of millions of illegal migrants to this country. If I have it my way, mass deportations of many federal unelected bureaucrats out of Washington, D.C. There's a lot that we can carry out in a practical sense, but I think that there's a deeper deficit of national identity and pride that we need to fill at a moment where less than 16% of Gen Z says they're even proud to be an American. We have a 25% recruitment deficit in our own U.S. military. So a lot of our foreign policy challenges start with maybe a weakness in our own military at home. But where does our weakness in our own military at home begin? It begins with a loss of conviction, a loss of self-confidence as a nation. Just yesterday, I was in Washington, D.C., meeting an ambassador of a major country, major ally of ours. And, he left the meeting and he said, look, what we're all waiting for is for you guys, this is in America, for you guys to just figure out, do you actually still believe in yourselves? If you do, that's great. We're ready to follow. But if you don't, there's going to be somebody else that fills the void. In that case, he's referring to China. But he said, that's not a question that we can figure out. That's a question that you need to figure out for yourselves, and just let the rest of the world know, do you actually still believe in America or not? And I told him when I left is, I, for one, not in some fake or cheesy politician way, but in a true way, despite the fact that it looks like we're a nation in decline, and in some real sense we are, yes, I still do believe in this country. Yes, I still do believe in the ideals that set this country into motion 250 years ago. Are we a nation in decline? I'm not going to deny it. Is it morning in America? Ronald Reagan wouldn't tell you that it is today, because it's not, but it can be. I don't think we have to accept decline as our outcome. I think we still can be a nation in our ascent. We're not going to be doing it by being victims. And I preach this to the left, but I preach it to my kids. We'd be hypocritical if we didn't preach it to ourselves as well. We don't want to be victims. We're going to be victorious. Are we playing on an even playing field? No, we're not. But we have to accept the fact that the rules of the game are what they are, but we have a country to save, and we don't get any extra credit for whining about the odds being stacked against us, from the media to the way our elections are conducted. Do I love it? No. Are we going to fight to change it? Absolutely. But in the meantime, we have to work within the constraints we have to achieve what our country requires, what posterity requires, what our kids, my son and our one-day grandchildren and great-grandchildren, what they require too. And if our founding fathers could make that sacrifice, dying for their country, having their homes ransacked and burned to the ground by the British, 5 of them who signed the Declaration of Independence were tortured and captured by the British until their deaths. If they could do that 250 years ago for us, then we can do it today for posterity. And, I'll close with one of the things that I do teach our sons, as best I try to, is that the number one factor that determines whether you achieve your goal in life or even in something small, the number one factor that determines whether you succeed is actually you. There's a lot of other factors that matter. Make no mistake. You're not the only determinant of your destiny, but the number one determinant of your own destiny is actually you. And I think that applies to us as individuals. I think it applies to us as a conservative movement. I think it applies to us at the level of our nation. And I think that now more than ever, our country calls for us to step up. I know you all are doing what you do, and you're here today because you care about this country every bit as much as I do. I thank you for your passion for reviving our country for our kids. We're fighting right there with you. And I'm grateful in advance for everything you're going to do in the next 45 days as well. So thank you for having me. And I appreciate the opportunity, even remotely, to be able to say hello to the group. Thank you.
Thank you so very, very much for joining us today. We know that your time is precious. I will say that my littlest angel, my son, enjoys tennis. And so he's going to have to practice some push-ups if he's going to play you someday, Vivek.
I would love that. Yeah. Well, pretty soon I'm sure he'll be beating me. I think my son is coming back because he wanted to. You want to say hello to everybody?
Say hello.
Say hi. Hi. She's telling me about my son too.
Dakota Federation of Republican Women. I love it.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks, dude. Thank you for coming on. We appreciate you today.
I appreciate you having me, and we'll come see you guys in person. All right, count on it.